Welcome everyone to Idaho Department of Environmental Quality's Letter of Interest virtual training. My name is Bonnie Record and I am a grant and loan analyst here, and you're going to be hearing from the rest of our grant and loan team as well as technical services. This is the second of our Letter of Interest virtual trainings, and we will be recording this training. So you should have gotten a disclaimer pop up. So just a couple of housekeeping items as we go. Like I said, this training is being recorded and we will be emailing a link to all of the registered attendees sometime after the meeting. The slides are also available on the DEQ webpage, but LaDawn has also posted those in the chat box. So you can follow that link for a slide handout of this training to follow along. All participants will be muted, so please try to stay muted until we have our question time at the very end, and then we will address questions. And in addition, you can add questions to the chat box as you have them throughout the training. LaDawn will be monitoring the chat box and answering some questions as we go, and then saving questions for the group discussion at the very end as well. So our agenda today is that we will be in the training from 10 a.m. to noon. We are going over a timeline and some background information about our letter of interest process, and then we will start to dive into our Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan letter of interest form. Then we will go over the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund loan letter of interest form, and we will just highlight the differences between the two forms there. And then after that, we have a designated time for questions and discussion. So we anticipate being able to get to a lot of questions and provide more information there. So please add your questions to the chat box throughout the training for that. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of some of the people that you'll be hearing from today. And all of these people work for DEQ in different capacities, and they will introduce themselves as they are speaking and presenting. So now I'm going to hand this over to Mariana Peavy for a welcome and introduction.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mariana Peavy. I am the Grant and Loans Bureau Chief here for DEQ. And thank you for coming to our Letter of Interest training. This is the first year we have done it, and we've definitely had a lot of participants and really great engagement with people on the Q&A. We plan to continue to do this training every year. And we're looking forward to also doing a training on the grant letter of interest, but we'll touch base on that at the end of the presentation. Today, right now, what I wanted to do is just go over a little bit of the grant loan program, the SRF program, and how we get our funding. Now, what makes up the funding for the SRF program are grants from EPA. We get 2 grants from EPA, a drinking water grant and a clean water grant. Now, these appropriations and grant amounts vary year to year. But in the last few years, for each of these grants, we have received around $7 million each. Now, these grants require a state match, around 20% for each of these grants that the state of Idaho contributes. Along with this money, our program receives repayment dollars that go back into the fund. So all these loans that we've lent out over the last 30 years come back into the fund, and then we lend that back out. In the last, I would say, last several years, our loan production has been really high. There's a lot of projects happening, and we use, every dollar that we have. we haven't been able to lend out as many new loans as we'd like because the demand is definitely very high. But this will change over the next 5 years due to really the support of infrastructure projects nationally. Yesterday, President Biden signed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress. And I haven't gotten the final numbers of what we will be receiving from this infrastructure bill, but we will be receiving a good increase to the SRF program. The estimates that I have received are we will be receiving $22 million for the Clean Water SRF fund. So that's an increase from $7 million. So that's triple the amount that we usually receive. For the drinking water state revolving fund, it will increase to $44 million a year for the next 5 years. These amounts do not include the state match or the repayment dollars that we collect. So we're definitely having a lot more money we can put towards infrastructure projects. Now, in this bill that we're receiving, in this infrastructure bill, there is a requirement for us to also increase the amount of principal forgiveness we give out. Principal forgiveness is essentially grant dollars. But we call it principal forgiveness because what we do is we reduce the amount of the loan that you will be receiving. Now, on the Clean Water SRF side, we will be giving out around $7 million next year. And on the drinking water side, our principal forgiveness amount will be around $10 million. Again, please note that these are just projected amounts. They're not finalized by EPA, but I really wanted to share this great news of this additional money that we'll be getting to help out disadvantaged communities. The next item I wanted to discuss was the American Rescue Plan Act. The state of Idaho received $1.2 billion for what we call ARPA funding. Now, the state, how they're able to spend this $1.2 billion is when they can respond to COVID health emergencies and negative economic impacts. They could provide premium pay to essential workers. They could also provide government service extensions due to lost revenue due to COVID. And then the fourth area in where they can spend ARPA dollars is necessary investments to water, sewer, and broadband. Now, the US Treasury, how they defined how states can invest in water and sewer is that if the upgrades or anything that they need would qualify for state revolving fund dollars, so essentially how we run our program, it can qualify for ARPA dollars. Now, that doesn't mean that the state would put the money into our program. It just states that anything would qualify for state revolving fund dollars is what they can put investment to drinking water and wastewater projects. Now, the governor's office is going to propose a budget here soon on how they want or how they suggest that $1.2 billion should be spent. But the state legislators have the final say on how that money is allocated out. Now, the state legislators don't go into session until mid-January, and that's when we anticipate to hear a little bit more of how they plan to spend the ARPA funds, how much will go to drinking water and wastewater projects, and how. So that money could be funneled through our program, or it could they could find other means on putting it towards drinking water or wastewater projects. I think ultimately the goal is we definitely think it's really important that it goes to drinking water, wastewater projects, regardless if it comes through our program or not. Now, we do have to anticipate or plan for the fact that we may be receiving some ARPA funding to apply to drinking water, wastewater projects. So what we're doing is with our letter of interest, and we'll touch more on that, is that there is a box on our letter of interest. If you want to be considered for any of these ARPA dollars, to mark yes or no, if the money comes through DEQ. And that way, when we get told if the money's coming to us and the state legislators dictate how they want us to spend that money, then we can pull those who are interested in ARPA funding out of the priority list or add to it and funnel some of those monies to those who submitted letter of interest. I do want to also mention that we have received some ARPA dollars already. We received $2 million for planning grants. We have already applied some of those dollars to priority lists that we for this fiscal year, for our fiscal year 2022, but we will have money remaining for next year. And Alicia will be speaking a little bit later on in the presentation, and we'll touch base on that a little bit more. But overall, I do want to let you know our plan is to work off of our existing priority list for any ARPA funding we will receive. And this is definitely why we wanted to put on this training for a letter of interest, make sure everyone has a good understanding of how to apply for funding, either additional money we received on the SRF side or money we received through ARPA funding. One thing I do want to share, there is a map here that we have showed how we've allocated money out. The way we allocate money is really based off of need in the state. And we are very proud that we've really allocated these funds fairly throughout the state and evenly throughout the state. So we did want to show this map on the slide showing how we've been able to disperse funds all over the state for the past 30 years. All right, I'll go ahead and pass it on to the next speaker.
All right, so I just wanted to share with you this timeline, and this is our letter of interest timeline for our state fiscal year 2023. So we posted our letter of interest forms online and also mailed out our letter of interest forms on October 22nd. And right now is November, and we are holding online training events. Also, we will be holding a grant training specific to the planning grant letter of interest forms in December. So stay tuned for information on that later in today's training. The important date to keep in mind here is January 14th of 2022, and that is the due date for completed letter of interest forms to be submitted to the state. So from there, after January 14th and into February 2022, DEQ will review and rate all of the letter of interest that were submitted for the year for both the planning grants and the loans. And then on April 1st, intended use plans are posted for public comment for 30 days. And in May, the Board of Environmental Quality will receive those documents for review and approval. In June 1st, 2022, notification letters are sent, and then funding becomes available in July of 2022. So this is just a good visual to keep in mind the entire process. And now Charlie is going to talk to you about the intended use plan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Parkins. I am the grant and loan coordinator for the program. And I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper on the grant priority list and the IUP and how that's all formed and all that kind of stuff. As Bonnie mentioned, after we get the LOIs, we rank them. This is primarily just from severe issues all the way down to minor issues. The list goes from the top severe issues all the way down to the minor issues. There are some instances, particularly on the loans, where a readiness to proceed comes into play. If a system that actually ranks lower than a system above that, but has either completed the facility plan or has completed the environmental or both, or they have the authority to incur debt, they can actually leapfrog excuse me, over the system above them just because they're ready to proceed. This is actually pretty common through a lot of the states. This isn't just an Idaho thing. The reason is because as stewards of the funds, we have to make sure that we're getting these funds spent out in a timely fashion. Mariana was talking about the ARPA funding. If we do get the ARPA funding, there is deadlines that we have to meet to ensure that those funds that we're getting allocated to us are getting spent out. And so that readiness to proceed kind of plays a big factor in our ranking and our rating process. So the first step is just ranking them from severe issues down to minor issues, but there can be some adjustments based on readiness to proceed. Once we have that lined out, we send out our IUP and our grant priority list just internally to give the entire DEQ a set of another eyes just to review and make sure everything looks correct, and any of the systems that they may have anticipated submitted letters of interest did in fact submit LOIs and their rankings are correct and all that kind of stuff. From there, we do post it out for a 30-day public comment. As Bonnie mentioned, that gives the public an opportunity to look at where they're at on our draft priority list. It's still a draft at that point. If they have comments, they can make them during that 30-day public comment period. From there, we send it to the DEQ board, and they just review it to make sure everything looks correct. And then once they sign off on it, then it becomes a final final grant priority list or final IUP. So there is a small chance that things might change from the time we put it out for public comment to the final draft. So keep that in mind. Once the DEQ board has approved everything, then as Bonnie mentioned, we'll send out letters to all the systems that submitted letters of interest around June, just to notify them where they fell on the fundable range. As Mariana mentioned, we have typically a lot of more demand than we have supply of funds, so we're not able to fund all the projects. So we'll notify you where you fell on that priority list. And I think that's it I have.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. So just going into a little bit more detail on our rating criteria and rating process, as Charlie mentioned. So first of all, again, the letter of interest forms are due January 14th, 2022. And then from that point on, from basically the end of January to the beginning of March, we are conducting internal to DEQ review and rating meetings. And so those meetings are conducted between the state office, so the grant and loan staff here in the state office, as well as regional engineers from the specific region where the letter of interest was submitted, and then also our technical services engineers. So as a group, it's a collaborative process to fill out these rating forms, which are posted on the DEQ site for your reference. And that includes reviewing all of the additional documentation submitted as attachments with the letter of interest forms, and then discussion within those groups. So as Charlie mentioned, there's a focus on potential public health and environmental concerns, long-term viability of the system, and then Also, the status of the system's compliance with state and federal regulations. And all of that ranking criteria can be found in the state rules, which we are going to now have our technical services engineer, Mike Stambulis, talk to you next about that.
Good morning, everyone. As Bonnie said, I'm Mike Stambulis. I'm a water quality engineer who works mostly with the drinking water and wastewater program. So I'm very, very familiar with the rules behind design and construction of drinking water and wastewater system components. I've helped the grant and loan program score LOIs for about 7 years now. So I do have a lot of experience in seeing the iterations of how we've approached this process, with always the underlying goal of getting money out quickly to address the systems that are having the largest problems within the state. This slide emphasizes that our question and scoring criteria, as Bonnie noted, are codified in the rules. Each rule shown on this slide has a subsection titled Priority Rating System, which establishes the categories and points for both the grant and loan programs. So we use the rules as a basis to create the letters of interests. And if you review the rating forms, which LaDon has posted a link to in the chat box, we post them on DEQ's website. You will note the categories and points that follow the rules. And actually, I misspoke. LaDon put the links to the actual application forms in the chat box. But if you look at the what I was talking about was a rating forms, which actually designates the points that we allot for each question. So we'll start by getting a review of the clean water or wastewater loan forms. Not only has LaDon posted a link to the forms in the chat box, but if you would like, there's a link here if you in the slides, if you'd like to open up the forms to follow along, and that way you can post any questions that you have as we go through to address it at the end of this presentation. So section 1 provides the background information, including any permits under which your facility may be operating. And as has been mentioned a few times, the very first question is talking about the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and if you would like to be, if your project to be considered for ARPA funds. This is an important question. The goal for this is to avoid having to re-rank everyone if funding becomes available at a different time than the typical SRF funding. It also helps us sort projects to award principal forgiveness to. It also gives Mariana and Charlie the information to do the work behind the curtain to arrange the funds in the most efficient and expeditious manner possible and address the biggest issues that we have. So moving on to the next section of the form, that we ask for you to describe the problems that your particular project will address. This section of the form is particularly helpful for those of us reviewing and scoring your letter of interests. As I keep saying, we score based on issues the system plans to address with a proposed project. The project description helps us assess if your project is appropriately scored as addressing the water quality issues identified in the letter of interest. The next section talks about project readiness. DEQ needs to assess how close you are to beginning a construction project, and as Charlie said, so we can get the most dollars on the ground as quickly as possible. This information is especially important in years where funding is competitive, which is basically every year, hopefully a little less competitive with additional funds through the various federal acts, but we, as has been stated, we want to get the money has timelines on it, and we need to give the money for the loan projects to folks who are ready to proceed. Also, it's important to note that we can't issue a loan to a system that has not completed the facility planning process. You are not required to produce the facility plan through our grant program, but grants are available to assist you in preparing the facility plan, and Alicia is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yep, thank you, Mike. I just wanted to introduce myself to everybody. My name is Alicia, and I am a grant loan officer, but I mostly do work with that planning grant program. And although we're not going to be covering too much of our grant program in this presentation, I did want to briefly mention it today. So our planning grants do cover 50% of eligible planning costs, and they are geared more towards those systems that need to update their facility plan and complete that environmental review before they move on to the construction phase and apply for a loan with us. As Mariana did mention at the beginning of our presentation, we did receive the American Rescue Plan Act dollars for our planning grant program. So if you're interested in applying for a planning grant, you will need to submit a grant letter of interest. These are separate forms from the loan letter of interest forms that we're going over today, but they're fairly similar. They are still located in the same link that we've provided for our letter of interest forms on our website. So you can find them there. Please feel free to reach out to me or any of the regional offices if you have any questions on completing these forms. And with that, I'd like to introduce LaDon Kaler.
All right, good morning. So I'm going to briefly go over the state environmental review process, just to give you guys a brief overview of what this looks like. I know sometimes people are a little bit hesitant for this process, but a determination, environmental determination is needed to move forward with a state revolving fund SRF loan. And this can be done during the facility plan process. So this timeline shows that once the facility plan is approved by DEQ, so this, if they're using loan or grant funding for the facility plan, this is what happens. Then I'll reach out and have an environmental scoping meeting with the system and the engineers and then DEQ. And this is where we would also rope in rural development or block grant or Army Corps if you've got other funding. So we're all on the same page for an environmental review. Then we talk about the different alternatives and what types of consultations might be needed and whether the project will be a categorical exclusion or a finding of no significant impact, what kind of consultations may or may not be needed, and so on. Then the system will open up the alternatives for public comment and have a public comment period. They'll choose one and then get together any sort of documentation that's needed for a final environmental review. And then we will review that documentation, make sure everything is there, and then issue a determination on a legal notice for public comment if it's a FONSI or just as posted for review if needed. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, the last 5-6 years, we have completed more CADX determinations than FONSIs, and even the FONSIs go fairly quickly through our process, determination process. So just a difference in the determinations that we've seen, and a reminder, as part of the loan process, you will need an environmental review, and we can do it fairly quickly, and I would be the contact for that, or Bonnie Record.
Okay, thank you, Alicia and LaDon. And we're getting back to the next sections of the form. We're still in section 1, the project information. And this question right here asks for, or this page includes a question that asks for the status of your environmental determination. Has a final determination been issued? If you self-funded your facility plan, you may have to produce an EID as part of the loan project. The cost to produce an EID is loan eligible costs, meaning that we can reimburse for those expenditures as part of your loan project. The next question is one that's often misunderstood. It's asked if a public health emergency or hazard has been declared for your system. I highlight it because the serious issues or compliance issues does not necessarily mean a public health emergency has been declared by the DEQ board, DEQ, or the health department. So this question is very rarely answered in the affirmative. And then, but we do often interact with systems that have regulatory compliance issues. We start to look at more specific information pertaining to your system in section 2. The question provides some examples of what the different levels of non-compliance are. One particular example I'll highlight is in a IPDES or NPDES permit, they might be issued with a compliance agreement schedule, and this falls under high-level non-compliance, as you will be held and required to make system improvements on a schedule dictated by that permit. We also have reevaluated the way we score compliance issues. One goal of the program is to, as I keep saying, is to address major issues impacting water quality. One surrogate to score impacts is through non-compliance documents. While it may seem counterintuitive, a system receives more points for larger, more serious compliance issues. And then, yes, okay, sorry, I was looking down at my notes, so I didn't notice that Bonnie had already gone to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we are trying to level the playing, reevaluate how we address non-compliance issues and level the playing field a bit for systems that are largely in compliance. We've added a second question, which evaluates a system standing with their compliance documents. If you're in good standing, meaning you're meeting the schedule in terms of the order or agreement, you will retain all the points awarded for high-level non-compliance. However, if you're at a place where DEQ is pursuing legal action or has some other indication that a system is not following their compliance agreement schedule or other consent order or permit compliance schedule, then you'll lose a portion of the points. Once again, that's just to try and level the playing field for folks who are not in a non-compliance scenario, or basically are good actors, so to speak. But at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas Hebert to discuss some of the other sections of the forms.
All right, thank you, Mike. My name is Nicholas, and I am a water quality engineer in the grant and loan program. And I work in the drinking water and wastewater world. So we are going to dive into the details of some of the LOI ranking criteria. So this is section 2, item C on the LOI form. It's watershed restoration. And you can see right there under the bullet item C is a rule reference to the criteria of how we are allowed to rank this criteria, and we're allowed to give up to 100 points. One of the things as we dive into the details, and just as a caveat, there will be no quiz or no test at the end, so you can tune me out if you find this less than interesting. But one of the things I would like to kind of give a tip for you guys as you're filling these out, a lot of times as we get into the details, it's going to ask a lot of very specific information, mostly geared to the surface water, the stream, the water quality of the stream that you may or may not be impacting or trying to improve. And a lot of times these questions, it's where in the world do we find this information, right? It's not something that we normally work with in our day-to-day jobs, myself included. And so the second paragraph there on this page gives you a link to DEQ website. It's a online mapping system. And I'm actually going to share my screen for this, because this is a tool that I think you're going to find really helpful as you fill these out. So if you go to our website and under public information, if that link doesn't work for you, this is a way you can find it. You can go under the interactive mapping and GIS data. Under this, you'll see a interactive mapping tab. You click on this interactive mapping tab, and it brings up these preloaded maps. A couple of these maps that will, three or so of these maps that will really be helpful in filling out the clean water LOI will be this drinking surface water quality map, the Idaho nitrate priority area map, and the DEQ groundwater quality data map. If we click on the integrated report for the surface water quality, it's going to bring up a map that looks something like this. It's a map of Idaho. And we can start to zoom in, and I'll zoom into Boise, because we all like visiting Boise, and some of us live here. And you can see the stream segments of the Boise River start to pop up. And if we click identify, this little button here, we can actually come down here and click on the section of stream that that your project is going to improve. And it's going to pull up this little tab here. It's going to give you some information on this section of the stream. And where you're going to go to find all the information is under the status data link. And this is going to pull up another window. And this is really where you're going to spend most of your time. This is where you're going to, this is where all the information is going to be available. Almost all the information is going to be available to the questions that follow in the LOI. So as we dive into the LOI, I want to be able to think back or look back to this. I'm not going to navigate out to this page anymore. It'll be different for each section of stream, each segment of stream. But for example, you can see here we've got some identification number for this lower Boise River. We got the HID number, and we've got some pretty interesting information here. We can see it's got beneficial uses that are assessed. It has a support status. It also has a category. This category is associated with the classical 303D status that people are familiar with. A category 4 or category 5 would be designated as a 303D stream. And so you can see it's listed as a 303D stream for multiple parameters through this section. We can continue to scroll down on this page, and there's additional information that's going to be helpful as well. One of the things I want to point out on this one is it looks like there's 2 TMDLs that have been approved by EPA. You can see this right here. You can actually click on this link and it will take you out to the TMDL itself, which is a total maximum daily load document, which again, we're going to see questions that come up with this LOI that are going to ask about the TMDL. And this is where you would go to find this information. The TMDL itself might be something you need to pull up, download, and look through to answer some of these questions. So this is really, this is something that I think is going to be really helpful. Again, if you have questions about this, the folks in DEQ can certainly help walk you through this. Probably your best first stop would be your regional DEQ contact, because the surface water regional folks really, they really live in this world day to day. We just kind of jump into it when we have to fill out these LOIs. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to go back to the PowerPoint slides. So again, as we move down into the preceding questions here, question number 2 right off the bat is going to prompt us for an answer that we could pull directly off that website. That being, will the project implement best management practices or construction of wastewater facilities as part of a TMDL implementation plan? So how are you going to know if your project is part of a TMDL implementation plan? Chances are it probably isn't. So most projects will answer no. However, there are cases where that TMDL document will actually have an implementation plan. So you're going to have to go looking for that, right? Or call DEQ, call your regional DEQ office and ask, hey, is there a TMDL on this segment of river? And B, does it have an implementation plan? And C, is our project part of that? There are instances where maybe a wastewater treatment plant or some sort of non-point source project might actually be incorporated into a TMDL implementation plan to reduce pollutant loadings to a segment of stream. So it's possible, although like I said, it's pretty rare. Moving down to question number 3, will your projects reduce impacts to surface water? Almost always. I mean, that's kind of a give me question, right? Almost always the answer is going to be yes. Most projects are going to reduce impacts to surface water in some manner. And so as we continue down these questions, question 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D, 3E, and 3F, these are mostly projects revolving around this 303D status, the surface water body status. And those are all questions that you should be able to get off that website. I will note that there are times where a stream doesn't have any assessment of it, right? It doesn't have any TMDL, it doesn't have any issues with it. And so if you pull up a segment of stream and it's blank, in other words, there's nothing there, talk to your DEQ regional office, but there is a chance that there hasn't been any work done on that stream. So question number 4 gets a little bit away from the surface water and moves a little bit into the impacts to groundwater. It's possible that as a primary or secondary benefit, we could be improving groundwater quality. If you answer yes to that, we'll want a description of what that looks like. And then, moving down to the next page, it's going to continue to ask questions about groundwater quality. Again, this is item A and B are questions that you can go to that website that I showed you, the DEQ mapping tool, and you can click on it to find if it's a nitrate priority area or if it's a sole source aquifer. There's also a link in item C there if it's expected to reduce pollutant concentrations over a critical groundwater area. So that would be like a groundwater management area. And that's handled through IDWR. That's not a DEQ website that function. And so that's something that we have a link there for IDWR. And you can certainly reach out to your local IDWR office if you have questions. There are a few of these groundwater management areas kind of sprinkled through the state that you may or may not be within the boundaries of. So moving on to question number 5, this is geared towards projects that will improve habitat for threatened and endangered species. There's a link there to the Fish and Wildlife Services that'll help you answer that question. If you're in the Salmon River Basin or the Clearwater River Basin, certainly there's salmon and steelhead, bull trout. That's kind of like the slam dunk of endangered species for this question. So if you're somewhere else in the state, click on that website and see if there's some threatened endangered species that you may be improving habitat for. So again, moving down to the next slide here. We're going to continue to kind of dive into the details of some of this surface water, clean water questions. So again, you can see under item D, you can see the rule citation there for how we rank these questions up to 100 points. The first question really is meant to be what I kind of consider a super incentivizer for reuse or lagoon or converting, replacing old septic tanks. This is something that has been identified as a issue statewide, and we really want to be able to help folks or prioritize projects that are bringing forward reuse, lagoon, or septic tank projects. Question number 2 gets into the beneficial uses for surface water, and these are under the water quality standards. There's 5 beneficial uses that are listed for surface water. And on the next slide, it'll give you opportunity to select which beneficial uses will apply to the surface water that your project is going to improve. And right off the bat, item B and E are beneficial uses that apply to all waters of the state. So recreation and aesthetics apply to all waters. So those are kind of give me points. Again, you can go to that website mapper, and that will pull up your stream section, and it'll give you the beneficial uses that have been assessed to those to that segment of stream. Things like water supply, that's domestic water supply. You may or may not have a municipality or irrigation district that uses that water and that surface. So you may or may not be able to click item C for a beneficial use. Question number 3, kind of moving on here through these, is a question that really is geared towards a state priority. And this is something that we don't see very often, but it's possible that that you could be designated as a priority project with kind of like under a special use or special status of waters. And so again, that's something that you can go on DEQ website and find out that information pretty easily. So moving on to question number 4, this is kind of a item A through D, kind of a catch-all question. Make sure we don't leave anybody out. Again, it talks about converting septic systems, which we already kind of talked about, but it's another opportunity to incentivize that. removal of stormwater outlets to surface water, combined sewer stormwater systems, which we typically don't have in Idaho, but you never know, right? You can try to click the box and provide documentation, convince us otherwise. Or similar projects that would reduce impacts to surface water. And we're certainly kind of, again, a catch-all. If you have a project that maybe doesn't fit the box, this is the chance for you to click that box and provide documentation. So I think that moves us on to sustainability green efforts. And this is kind of commonly known as green project reserve elements of your loan. And so you can see again the rule citation there. And part of the backdrop of this, getting a little bit in the behind the scenes, Mariana talked about the EPA capitalization grants that we get, and then pass on to recipients. And part of the red tape or the strings that come attached for us is what's referred to as green project reserve. At least 10% of that EPA grant money has to be dedicated to a green project. And so EPA wants us to promote and track these green projects. And if we're not able to allocate that 10% towards these projects, we lose the funding. And so this is an opportunity for us to really partner with you as the facility, as you are scoping out your project and you've got these ideas and maybe some interesting things as we go through these questions will kind of spark your interest. This is an opportunity for you to check the box, to get some extra points, and also keep that funding in Idaho. Make sure we don't lose that funding. It's something that you will need to carry through into construction. And so that's something to be certainly cognizant of as you're checking these boxes. You don't want to check it unless you're, at least, somewhat committed to following through in the construction process with these project elements. So all that being said, we'll back up one slide there, Bonnie. All that being said, the first question under this really doesn't apply to the 10% funding of the Green Project Reserve. It really has to do with whether or not you'd like to sponsor a non-point source project. So it's possible. So that's a non-point source projects are kind of a different pot of money. They're different worlds, so to speak. But there is an opportunity for an SRF project to partner with a non-point source project and kind of get your biggest bang for your buck for both projects. So if you're interested, certainly reach out to DEQ to explore what a non-point source project is and how you can partner with that. Okay, moving on, getting into the nitty-gritty details of Green Project Reserve. The first item, so there's 4 items that are considered 4 categories of Green Project Reserve. And these are some examples that we've provided for innovative management-based efforts. You can see these management-based efforts, for example, item A, being a ongoing capital budget has been funded and supported by a capital improvement plan. In general, that's a pretty good idea, right? And so this is our opportunity to incentivize folks that have either done that or want to do that. Check that box, get points, but we will want to see documentation in the project that you're doing that. You can kind of look down through these questions here, items B through G. They're mostly, again, management-based efforts. How are you going, for example, item G is how is the project going to aid in preparation and adaptation to long-term effects of climate variation, extreme weather, drought, something along those lines. And you can provide a description of what that looks like. Moving to the next slide, again, there's some more examples here under management innovative efforts, item H through L there, kind of give some ideas of what some innovative, more innovative Green Project Reserve elements might look like. You will see at the end of that section, there's a budget estimate allocation for those management-based innovative efforts. This is something that we've added to the LOI this year for each criteria, each category of Green Project Reserve. And it's important for us because we need to be able to report back to EPA on how much of that funding is being earmarked or being committed to for the Green Project Reserve. This is not a budget number we're going to hold you to. I mean, I would consider this a facility planning, category 5 type cost estimate, where you're plus or minus 30 to 50%. That's fine. We don't need detailed information in the cost estimate here. But we do need something. And so if you have questions on, how much should I, claim, so to speak, for this project or this component, feel free to reach out to DEQ and we can kind of iterate and help you with that. We do have a lot of case history. I'll mention that on our website for these Green Project Reserves. And so there's a chance that you're probably not the first person doing this. And so on our website, we have a whole list of case history. You could go and review facilities that have already done these types of projects and allocated funds towards these projects, and no reason to reinvent the wheel with some of this. So moving down to item 3, follows a similar format. Thanks, Bonnie. Green efforts, this is something that, you might, be proposing a wetland as part of your treatment process. Those are seeming to gain a little bit of traction, a little bit more in Idaho anyway than it used to. So this would be a chance to get some points for those green efforts. I haven't seen a project yet. I'm sure they exist that have a green roof on a wastewater treatment plant with plants growing and whatnot. But you could always be the first one to do something like that. Item 4 is water conservation. So this is a little bit more common, where you might be doing a reuse project or retrofitting some kind of process or system within a treatment plant or a reuse site to be more water efficient. That can be a little bit more common. And then the last one on the next slide for these GPR items is the energy conservation efforts. And this is by far the lion force of what folks seem to be able to sign up for and follow through with. Things like VFDs, variable frequency drive pumps, are becoming very cost effective, very common. Energy efficient motors, the premium efficiency motors, have a great payback period on them, of a couple years usually compared to standard motors. So we see a lot of these energy efficiency and energy conservation efforts in the GPR. High efficiency lighting, if you want to put in LED and timers on lights building, that would totally apply to the GPR. It's a great way to get GPR points. Another common one is item J, which would be installing a SCADA system in some of your treatment works. Again, that can save you a lot of time and effort and even electricity in how you optimize and operate a treatment works facility. And so take a look through these as you fill them out, and as you're, kind of imagining what your project would look like, working with your engineer, what that would look like. Check these boxes and get some extra points. Again, there's a note there at the end that talks about, points may not be allocated if you don't get some kind of budgeting number, right? Like, we don't want to fill this in for you. Give us a budget estimate on these green project reserve items. And then, like I said, we can iterate through the construction process. We're not necessarily going to hold you to a cost, just the fact that you signed up to do it. So that gets us through really kind of I went really fast through a lot of information there. I'm sure as you all go back and start filling these out, you're going to be scratching your head and saying, what do I put in here? What do I do with this? That's normal. Reach out to us. We'll help you through it. But hopefully this gave you maybe a little bit of a direction of where to go to at least start to find some of these answers to some of these questions. So with that, I am through the nitty gritty, and I'm going to hand it over to Mariana, and she's talk a little bit about the affordability section.
Hello, everyone. I'm back again. Before I get into the affordability section, there was some information I forgot to share earlier on some of the funding efforts we're working on. With the state legislator and the governor's office trying to decide how much of the ARPA funding they want to put to drinking water, wastewater systems, what DEQ has opted to do is put out a survey to all drinking water and wastewater systems to get some basic ideas, number-wise, of their infrastructure needs over the next 5 years. We wanted to collect that information and then pass it on to the state legislators and the governor's office to help them in figuring out how much money maybe they want to allocate to drinking water and wastewater systems. It looks like that survey should be out by the end of this week. We are emailing it out to our contacts that we have for all the drinking water and wastewater systems, mostly either say the city clerks or the public work director, and in some case the operators as well. We will also try to email everyone that attended this training and let you guys know that that survey is out. Definitely, it's really important that the survey gets filled out. We really want to give an accurate picture of the infrastructure needs for the state. But more information will come out on there. We will try to post some information through our social media to let you know that that is out, but also make sure to check your emails. You might have to check your junk because we are doing a batched big effort on sending out that survey information. All right, nextly we'll be going over the affordability section. This affordability section is both in the Clean Water Letter of Interest and the Drinking Water Letter of Interest loan, LOIs. We use this information to help us see who qualifies for disadvantage as a disadvantaged community. Disadvantaged communities are who will be directing our principal forgiveness dollars to. So just to reiterate, we'll be getting around $7 million out next year for clean water projects and around $10 million for drinking water SRF projects. So that will be going to, again, disadvantaged communities. Just to start out here, what we're going to need to know from everyone is how many equivalent dwelling units there are, so EDUs. We will also need to know your current monthly user rates. And here we'll also need to know what the change in your O&M cost will be once the construction project happens. Most of the case, maybe it'll change a couple dollars per EDU. We have also seen that the cost will sometimes decrease once you get a better system into place. Now we are kind of looking at what your user rate charges are, and we also want to know if you've already increased your user rate in anticipation of this project. So you're kind of planning, you've already increased your user rates to help pay back any loan or funding that you get in order to do this project. And a lot of cases, sometimes maybe we don't see any changes to the user rate. So we want to know that as well. Now, going down to item 6, what we're looking at is what your user rate will be with debt service charge and whether it's going to be over 2% of your median household income. Now, that is definitely the criteria that we use to consider whether you are a disadvantaged community. Again, if your user rate is over 2% of the median household income, you would qualify as being a disadvantaged community. Now here, we will show you here in just a little bit how you can figure out what your median household income is, or your MHI for your community. But just to do the numbers a little bit, let me give you an example. If your median household income is, say, $50,000 a year, now 2% of 50,000 would be 1,000. Now, if you divide that 1,000 by 12, you will get a monthly figure. And in this case, it would, for 1,000, it would be $83 a month. So if your user rate with debt service is going to be over $83 a month, then you would qualify as being a disadvantaged community. Now, in order to, to show us what your median household income, we do need to see the evidence. We need to see how you came up with that figure for your median household income. We will be showing you how to receive that information on the census data. And definitely, if you do not think the census data really reflects your community's income, contact us and we can talk through maybe some solutions on finding out how to calculate that median household income. In some cases, some cities have opted or communities have opted to do an income survey. So that is definitely a possibility. Now go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, some systems, you're really close to that 2%, but you're not at that 2% or over threshold to be considered a disadvantaged community. You still have a little bit of a second chance to be considered disadvantaged. So if your median or your user rate is between 1.5% and 2% of your median household income, you can still qualify for being a disadvantaged community if you can show us two other items. That you have a declining population in your community, and second, that your unemployment rate is higher than the state's average. And on the letter of interest, we show a couple different ways in which you can provide that evidence to us. But again, you do need to show us that evidence that comes into play, and then you could, again, qualify for being a disadvantaged community. All right, right now I'm going to share my screen and show you how that census data website works. So right here, when you put in that website that we provided in the letter of interest, this screen comes up. Now, how to kind of get it activated is you would put in an address in your location and then further your search. Now, I am going to show you the city of Boise's demographics because I am in Boise. And I'm going to put in DEQ state office's address. So we're here at 1410 North Hilton. The map pops up where it shows right there where I am located at. And then you see here in this box, it shows you a lot of different breakdowns, not only where your address is, but where they can give you data. Now, what I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to pull up City of Boise's data here. So when you put the cursor over City of Boise, it shows you the map of the data that it's going to collect. So you have this here. Definitely we want the most accurate map of where your system provides services. So let's say you put in this address and maybe your system is a smaller community. Maybe it's a homeowners association. So maybe you use just the zip code. And so maybe this map area makes a little bit more sense to show where your system services. And you can kind of hover over a couple of these other options. And again, pick the one that's best accurate for your system. Now, maybe you're in a city, but really your system may provide outside the boundaries. Again, you can check out the map here and look at maybe what best qualifies. Here is the school district for City of Boise. It's definitely goes a little bit beyond the boundaries of the city. So this might be a better representation of your community, or you might even move up to the county. And then in Boise, what's interesting here is that just for the city, it doesn't include Garden City, which is in the middle of the community. So maybe you want to include Garden City. And so this is a little bit more accurate for your community. But in this purpose, again, I'm just going to pick City of Boise. This is the boundary in which, say, my system provides. So I'm going to click onto that. And it's going to pull up this screen. Again, it shows you a really great map, and then it shows demographics for that map. For the letter of interest, you will provide us either this link of what you're using to get your data. But if you scroll down here, again, this under economics, this is where it's going to show you your median household income. So you'll enter this into your letter of interest if you're doing City of Boise, and you'll put in 65,463. Now you can print off this screen here and provide it with your letter of interest so we can confirm that that's your median household income. It also gives us ability to see this map here to show that that's accurate for your system. You know, we may have a little bit back and forth if we don't have a really good understanding of maybe why you maybe chose a smaller map or a bigger map. But it's just to provide us making sure we're all on the same page of what your median household income. So for City of Boise, we all kind of know City of Boise is probably not going to be a disadvantaged community, but just to double check here, what I would do to see if I would qualify to be disadvantaged is I would times the $65,000 figure times 2, and that equates to $1,309. I divide that by 12, and it would be $109.11. So for the City of Boise to qualify to be disadvantaged, they would have to show that their user rate with the debt income would be pushed over that $109 a month figure to be considered disadvantaged. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here, but essentially this is what we'll need to show if you qualify for disadvantage. And now I'll go ahead and pass it off to Mike Stambulis.
Hello, folks, back again here. Thanks for hanging with us. We're in the home stretch now. We're just going to highlight a few differences between the drinking water revolving fund loan forms and the wastewater forms. Before we move on to some specific examples, I wanted to just point out that generally the forms follow the same content as flow. Section 1 will be the background information. Section 2 will have some more specific questions regarding that. What you'll notice as you go through the forms is that the questions are more specific to system components and public health impacts, as opposed to impacts to water quality, which makes sense from the way that we regulate drinking water versus wastewater systems. Another thing I would like to highlight is that, especially for drinking water applications, the documentation you provide us can be very helpful. And what helps us is not to just flood us with everything that you have regarding your system, but the information that's targeted to a question that you're requesting points for. For example, and also one other difference between the wastewater and drinking water form is the wastewater form is, as Nicholas went into detail, is a lot of information that you don't necessarily hold in-house regarding the stream, TMDL status, is it a 303D? Those aren't necessarily things the system's going to have available to them. However, on the drinking water side, the information is provided more from your point of view. What is the status of your wells and distribution system? Are you able to provide the quantity of water you need to serve the number of residents that you have drinking the water? And so that's why a little bit more documentation is appropriate for these loan forms. So as you go through those questions, you, as always, contact us if you have any questions while you're filling out your forms. But the first section I'll highlight that's a little bit different is the consent order, compliance agreement, schedule, or court order forms. Due to a difference in the rule language, we score these compliance issues within the drinking water program a bit differently. But however, for this year, we are going to take the same approach regarding being in good standing with any compliance agreement, consent order, or similar documents. The points are not nearly as high as they are in the wastewater form. As you can see in the preamble, it's only 30 points. But once again, to even the playing field for folks who are not yet into the compliance world with DEQ, we ask the question about, are you in good standing with that? If you are, you'll retain all the awarded points. And if not, if you're not acting in good faith with a compliance document, the system will lose a portion of the points. The next section that is a little bit different that we have is the bonus points section. So this is, once again, trying to reward systems that are operating in a manner that DEQ recognizes that leads to positive outcomes within their system. So you'll see that the drinking water protection plan. Do you have a cross-connection control plan? Were you free of significant deficiencies on the last sanitary survey? Are you keeping up with your monitoring? So we want to reward systems that are keeping up with the schedules of their monitoring requirements. And then the last one is regarding an asset management plan. Those are all useful. Some of these are useful tools to operate and maintain your system in a positive manner. Other are just a demonstration that you are doing what you need to provide safe drinking water to your community. And then the last thing I'll say before we move on is that throughout this process with both the wastewater and drinking water forms, we want to have transparency in how we rate these forms. So as we go through in a collaborative process between the state office and the regional office engineers and staff, if we decide to change something, we're going to make a comment on it. There are many reasons why we might add points or take away points from an application, but we do want to be transparent in explaining that so that in the public comment period, systems will have a chance to review that. And if they want to counter our decisions, they can provide additional information during that and we can reassess the points that we're awarded. But also the last thing about the transparency is that we want to make sure everybody understands that we are reviewing these in the same manner and treating every application in as much as we can in a consistent manner so that it's an equal footing to hand out these dollars in a competitive situation. And I think that's about all I'm highlighting on the drinking water form. So I'm going to turn it over to LaDon.
All right, so just a final part of the form is if you are submitting this form for a system, you're an engineer or you're the authorized submitter, make sure that you answer these questions towards the end, put in your name, date, etc. And then you will be making sure that these LOI forms are submitted by January 14th, 2022. So that's coming up pretty fast, and those will be submitted to me. They can be mailed in or they can be emailed. If you have questions about those submissions, you can let me know once I get them. I will typically send you back an email letting you know that I've got it. And then they get logged and we start the logging and review process for these. If you are interested in a planning grant and then potentially a loan for a drinking water system, you'll want to submit an LOI for a grant, drinking water grant, and a drinking water SRF LOI. So make sure you do both of those just in case that's something that you're looking at doing. Same for wastewater. Sometimes we have systems that are wanting to do their drinking water and wastewater plans at the same time. So you would submit an LOI for drinking water and an LOI for wastewater, clean water.
Okay, so we heard from a lot of different people, and I know we went over quite a bit of information. So here in just a minute, we are going to open it up for questions. So again, a reminder to add your questions to the chat box for LaDawn to look at, and then she'll be reading those off and directing questions to specific staff members, or we will also have a time at the very end where you can unmute and ask questions live in that way as well. So on this slide, we have just a couple of staff contact information, their phone numbers for Mariana and Charlie, and you heard from both of them. So those are a few good contact numbers. And again, we do have those slide handouts, so you can reference those for these phone numbers. And also regional office contact information, and these are the regional engineers for every regional office that DEQ has. So these are great sources of information for regional level knowledge on your particular projects and communities. All right, so we are just interested in learning how everyone here heard about this training. I'm going to go ahead and launch a Zoom poll that should be popping up on your screen. So go ahead and just take a moment to vote about how you heard about this training, and that will help us in the future with our marketing and how we publicize these trainings. Okay, it looks like we've had quite a few people vote. Looks like mostly people received the email from DEQ, so that is good for us to know. Thank you for voting. I can share the results here, and everyone can just look if you're interested. Okay, so we are going to just share one more training opportunity that we will be having here on Tuesday, December 7th. And that will be a very similar training in structure to today's workshop, but we will be going over the planning grant letter of interest forms. So today we primarily went over the drinking water and the clean water loan letter of interest forms, and you heard about the grants a little bit from Alicia. And we will be having a specific training for that. LaDawn has put the registration link for the December 7th grant training in the chat box, and there are some details here on the slide. So you can contact me with any questions you have, and that training will also be getting recorded. So go ahead and register for it if you would like to receive a recording, even if you can't make the live training. So we look forward to addressing your grant related questions and going over those forms in more depth at that time. So at this point, we are going to have plenty of time, about 40 minutes for any questions. So please add any to the chat box, and LaDawn will be reading those and directing staff to answer, or after that, we will open it up for live questions.
All right, so I'm going to start with Mariana, just a few questions directed towards her. So the first one 10 million in principal forgiveness, is that just for our county? From Adam.
I'll clarify, for the $10 million on the drinking water side that I put out for principal forgiveness, that is for the state. So that is specifically for us. So out of that 44 million that that we're getting for grant, but out of that 44, 10 million will be specifically principal forgiveness for the state.
Great. Next question. If a community already has a loan, do you recommend submitting an LOI to take advantage of potential ARPA funds?
Yes. There are still a lot of unanswered questions on how the ARPA funding will get out. And usually if a system already has a loan through us and they want some additional dollars for their project, they're already a priority. We've already funded them and they can just email us for an increase to their loan. One thing that it's very difficult for us to do is to allocate additional principal forgiveness or any grant dollars to that existing loan because it's tied to the grant that we did the loan for that year. Definitely, I would suggest submitting a letter of interest again to get in onto the priority list because it just gives us additional avenues to try to help the system the best way we can. And so that's either getting access to some additional ARPA money, or maybe we can restructure their loan a little bit where they can get some additional funds through this infrastructure bill that just came through, so maybe some access to additional principal forgiveness. Definitely, we don't have all the guidance out yet, but we do know submitting that additional letter of interest for this year will give us some options.
Thanks, Mariana. Next question is the infrastructure spending just passed in the House included in the 7 million for clean water projects and 10 million for drinking water projects for next year's projects?
Yes, so out of those figures that I gave you, so out of the 22 for the clean water, $7 million of that 22 will be principal forgiveness. And then out of the 44 million, 10 million of it will be principal forgiveness.
Next one, is the ARPA funding the same as the one we recently submitted an LOI to the county for? That's from Larry Sims.
No, that is a great question. Thank you, Larry, for clarifying on that. So when with the ARPA funding, there's a couple different layers of who got money. So the state got money, and then counties got money, and cities got money. So all of these municipalities got funding. So I know in some cases counties who got money, they were figuring out how they can allocate those dollars out. And again, that money qualifies for investment to drinking water, wastewater systems. So if they wanted to allocate it to systems within their county, however they want to do that, that was an option for the ARPA funding. Cities who received money directly, they could put it right to their drinking water and wastewater systems. The project specific would have to qualify for under SRF qualifications, but they could directly put it to their funding. Now, this money that I've been speaking about is the state also got $1.2 billion. So the state is trying to figure out how to put out that money. And so we'll find out a little bit more here and starting in January, how the state legislature plans to allocate that money out. So again, it's another layer of possible funding to drinking water, wastewater systems. So we know these costly projects can get ARPA funding definitely help move these projects along. So it's definitely a great time to be doing a project right now with these funding options.
Thanks, Mary. I have a question for Nicholas. Is a facility plan required by DEQ or Idaho Water to drill for a new water source?
So the answer, kind of two-part question there, is who requires a facility plan, and then what is it required for? So a facility plan is a direct requirement from DEQ drinking water and wastewater rules. So anytime you go to modify your water or wastewater system, you're supposed to have an approved facility plan. And so that's prior to engineering the system, that's prior to plans and specifications. You're supposed to have a facility plan, which is your roadmap to how the facility is going to maintain compliance, come into compliance. It's a whole system-wide evaluation of your water or wastewater system. So that's a DEQ requirement. It's not an IDWR requirement. Specific to drilling new wells and the interaction between IDWR, there is some coordination between DEQ and IDWR that kind of happens behind the scenes. And so, yes, you would need a facility plan to construct a new well. And then obviously you would need to coordinate with IDWR because they're the ones that issue a drilling permit, and they oversee the permitting of the actual well driller himself. And so there's kind of some interagency coordination that happens when you have a new source between IDWR. That's mostly on the construction side. On the DEQ side, you would need to coordinate with DEQ for the planning and the engineering of the well. And then if you have an SRF loan, obviously it would need all of the above kind of incorporated into that. So a couple of different layers there, but to answer your question, yes, you need a facility plan, and that's a DEQ requirement, not an IDWR requirement.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. And I have another question for Mariana. How do we go about doing our own income study?
That one's kind of a longer answer. And so I'd suggest getting a hold of us. But one thing that we request that you get someone from a third party to do the income survey. Though I know a lot of times systems, when they're going out for funding, they're trying to not only qualify money through us, but maybe another funding agency, say Rural Development or Department of Commerce. Now, they may have specific rules on what is needed to provide an income survey. Now, DEQ has a little bit more flexibility to follow pretty much the format of requirements with some of those other funding agencies. So kind of following what maybe Department of Commerce does for block grant money. They have a really good outline of what's required for an income survey, and DEQ will accept that. Definitely contact Charlie and I for additional questions, and we can get a little bit more specific for you and what your needs are for the income survey.
Great, thanks, Mariana. So at this time, that's the end of our questions that are in the chat box. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask our staff members right now? And if so, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Comes to mind.
Okay, well, it doesn't seem like anyone else has questions. So thank you so much for attending, and we will be sending out a link to the recording, hopefully in the next few days or the next week or two for your review. Again, all of the links to the forms are in the chat box here, and we will stay on here for a few more minutes if anyone wants to unmute and ask a few questions. Thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you at the December 7th grant training.
Mariana, are you still there?
I am still here.
This is Marvin Fielding. Just curious, is ARPA being used interchangeably with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or are those two different funding? And what do you know about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding?
Okay, they are two different fundings. And so this is, like I said, kind of really interesting time for us on having more possibilities for great funding for drinking water and wastewater projects. Now for ARPA funding, again, the state received 1.2 billion, and we are waiting on hearing from the governor's office and the state legislators on how they're going to allocate that $1.2 billion. I'm anticipating a good majority of that funding will go to infrastructure, because out of the 4 requirements for ARPA funding, we really don't have a huge need for in the state, or we don't quite qualify. So I do think there's a serious look at putting a good chunk of that towards infrastructure. Now, for the Infrastructure Jobs Act, or EJA is another thing I've heard it called, that is completely separate. So Washington just put that towards infrastructure. And what I've been specifically looking at that is how it's going to come into the state revolving fund program. There are a wide range of funding they're allocating out of that infrastructure bill. What I spoke on specifically in this training is how our CAP grants are going up. And so over the next 5 years, our CAP grants are going to go up. So both on the, on the wastewater side, it's tripling. On the drinking water side, it's quadrupling. And that funding is going to be over the next 5 years. So I'm going to really, in just the state of Idaho, if we're putting forth the match requirements to that, we're looking around $250 million just coming into the Idaho State Revolving Fund program. Now, some things I didn't talk about earlier is that there are some other dollars associated with that bill besides transportation that I don't get into, but specifically to drinking water and wastewater systems. There are going to be some money allocated to addressing issues like PFAS. There are also going to be money to address lead service lines, and there's additional money going towards stormwater. I didn't get into those specifically because I do not know yet how Idaho DEQ would be able to handle that funding due to our staffing requirements. And definitely the more we know, we will put out some additional information. So there is a long answer for you.
So the 22 and the 44 million does not include the ARPA money or the EJA money?
Nope.
Okay. Okay,
So
that's encouraging. Thank you.
This is, yeah, you were here during ERA, right? And so essentially we're getting that, times 5 at least.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we're going to go ahead and end the meeting and stop the recording. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great day.